I would like to begin by saying we are gathered on the homeland of the Wampanoag people. The Wampanoag tribe, also known as the people of the first light, has inhabited this land for more than 12,000 years. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Wampanoag community, their past, present, and future generations. Thank you all and welcome to everyone here. Welcome to our virtual event, Art Collecting, Learning from the Experts, happening in conjunction with our annual art auction and brush off, ongoing until July 10th, now entering its third decade. This auction features a wide range of works from local and regional artists at all price points, for the first-time collector to those of you who have supported the arts for many years. I'm genuinely excited for our panel tonight. Our guests are all incredibly amazing, accomplished members of the art community, bringing a range of perspectives on everything from art collecting basics, building a collection you find meaningful, and developing relationships between artists and collectors. I would now like to allow our amazing guests to introduce themselves, two of whose work we are incredibly lucky to have as part of our art auction this year. I will let Mallory Ruymann introduce herself first.
Hi, thank you so much, Michael, and thanks to you and the Cahoon for having all of us. We're super excited to be here, and I'm so excited for the auction. My name is Mallory Ruymann. I describe myself as a curator and art advisor, but I kind of do a lot of different things in the art world, writing, arts administration, museum collection registration, anything really. I currently am the principal head of Curatorial Projects for an art advising company called Artworks. So what we do is we build bridges between artists and collectors, working with companies, individuals, and corporations to build what I like to call museum quality collections that feature and focus on artists who are unrepresented and underrepresented within the traditional arts ecosystem. And so this can take the shape of many things. It can take the shape of acquiring work from artists. It can take the shape of commissions, public and private commissions, and maybe even public programming like art making workshops. We're really just interested in finding opportunities for artists to connect with people. And so we like to create platforms. And I think that is it.
Azita, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone, and very glad to be here. Thank you to you, Mikey, and Cahoon Museum. I'm an artist. My name is Azita Moradkhani, originally from Tehran, Iran. Boston is my hometown in the United States. Currently living in New York, Brooklyn. I'm a visual artist, mainly do drawings and making sculptures. And so happy to be here with you all. Very excited.
Paul.
Hello, my name is Paul Kotakis. They have me listed on the program as founder of PÁIDIA Arts, which is a soon to launch new venture for me. But my background originally was as an artist. I went to the School of Museum of Fine Arts. And after graduating, was a little lost in the world trying to figure out what I was going to do with my art degree. And somehow stumbled into development fundraising and was raising money for a couple of different art schools over the last 15 years and spent a lot of that time running large art sales, art auctions, pop-up events, exhibitions, the works.
And Andrew.
Hello, my name is Andrew Fish. My preferred pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm a painter. I live and work in Somerville, Massachusetts. I teach at Lesley University's College of Art and Design, as well as Massachusetts College of Art and Design. I studied at School of Visual Arts in New York, and I've attended a lot of artist residencies, including one in China in 2019. I like to get involved in the arts communities and these kinds of events, and I show my work regularly. I have a solo show that's coming up in the fall at Child's Gallery in Boston, and you can see more of my work online on Instagram and on my website, and I'm just really happy to be part of this panel discussion tonight, so thank you for having me.
Thank you all so much. So for those of you who are new to Zoom, there's a little button down at the bottom of the screen that says chat. And if you could please help me welcome our panelists by saying hello and let us know where you're watching from tonight. And this is also a great location as we are going through tonight's panel. If you have questions that come up that you're interested in asking our panelists, this is the appropriate place to put them. So let's see where everyone's coming from. We've got people coming from Falmouth, Mass, right down the street. How about everybody else? Barnstable Village, Charlestown, Mass, Brooklyn, New York, Mashpee, Roslindale, Falmouth. The Cape is well represented tonight. Thank you very much, everyone. So what I will do now is I will hand this panel over to Mallory, who is going to lead us in our discussion about art collecting. And as I said, if you have any questions that pop up, please pop them in the chat, and I'll be happy to ask the panelists on your behalf as we get through the evening. Over to you, Mallory.
Awesome. I'm going to share my screen now. Can everyone see my screen okay? Wonderful. Great. Let's get started. We are here to talk about art collecting. We were just kind of chatting a little bit before, and someone asked, I don't know if I'm an expert in art collecting. Well, my whole ethos is if you're an artist, if you look at art, if you think about art, you're already an expert. And what I try to do through artworks is really encourage people to think of themselves as experts in their own right. Part of democratizing the field is very much participating. So what is art collecting? It really begins with looking. You go to a gallery, you go to a museum, maybe you're on Instagram and you see an artist whose work you really like. That leads, I think, to learning. Maybe you click on someone's website. Maybe you sign up for a membership at a museum and you slowly kind of become involved that way. And then I think there's also an aspect of connecting. So whether it is with artists directly, and we're so lucky to have Andrew and Azita here to connect with directly, or maybe it's through a gallery, or maybe you join a tour at a museum, and you start to kind of meet people and find out more. And then there's the actual act of acquiring. So art collecting, I think, begins a lot further in the journey before the acquisition, but then there's the actual act of finding something that you love, that you connect with, and that you feel like will enrich your life in some significant way. And then I always like to talk about stewarding. So after maybe you're here, you find something you really like in the auction, what do you do after you have it in your hands or in your home? There's framing, maybe you put it on the wall, and then you might move it around your house as you acquire more and more things. So art collecting is really, I think, the point I'm making is that it's a lifelong journey. And it's really, I think, about learning and being with art in a really human way. And I think anyone can do it. We often think about art collections, museums, and there's a lot of talk about the art market and how, NFTs are non-fungible tokens are being sold for $60 million. But there's tons of really accessible artwork out there. And it's great that the Cahoon has so many wonderful things for us all to think about as potential collectors. So to kind of go back a little bit to the art market, there's a few different strategic ways to approach acquiring an art object. Artists are one direct way. Artists sell their work directly to collectors very often. And it's as simple as emailing someone. You get their email from a website and you ask them if this work that you saw was available, and the transaction kind of occurs that way. And then there's also galleries. So galleries represent various artists, and we'll have an inventory of things that are available for people to acquire. And sometimes they'll have shows of these objects, but then oftentimes there are things that they're keeping around too. So what you see on the walls is just the beginning of what's available often in galleries, which is great for delving into an artist's body of work. There's also auctions. We hear about Sotheby's, Christie's, Phillips, kind of these big auction houses in New York, in London. And then there's these really wonderful philanthropic charity auctions that are supporting local museums, local art institutions. And they're also really wonderful ways to acquire work that's really accessible and is going towards supporting a really wonderful cause or institution. I think there's also a really great depth of work available through online platforms. Off the top of my head, Artsy, which galleries can put their work on, and you can click into and look up any artist and find work that is for sale through galleries. And then there's also great apps that let you connect with artists directly. So for example, there's this new app in New York that I love called Art Fair, where artists can go on, put up work that's for sale, and then collectors can directly transact with artists. And then I think there's another pocket of the art world that's doing really interesting things. I'm calling it innovative connectors. So people who are offering new ways to engage with artists directly and support people in a really meaningful way, because you buy one art object and then what happens to the artist after that? And then I think innovative connectors allow for people to support artists in a sustained way, which is why I think it's so interesting what Paul is doing. And we'll return to that in a second. So I am just throwing up this statistic from the COVID-19 impact on the Massachusetts creative economy from the Massachusetts Cultural Council. Obviously, it's been a really tough 18 months for creatives and artists, people who rely on selling to sustain themselves. People have lost money, and I'm putting this out there because whenever you buy an art object, you're also supporting a person, an artist who is making their living. And so there's something really special about supporting their career through collecting them, because it allows for them to sustain their practice further. So we're transitioning the conversation, art collecting, we're here to talk about it. But what if we thought about collecting also as caretaking and caring for each other? Obviously, whenever you collect art, you want to acquire what you love. You don't want to necessarily live with something you don't like. So visually, aesthetically, compositionally, you want to be surrounded by things that make you feel something, make you feel good. But we can also, I think, make decisions with intention and also understand that every act of collecting is also an act of caretaking and will have present and future implications on artists, the art community, and culture at large. So Paul, who's going to speak next, I think really his work and what he's doing right now really speaks to this idea of a sustained engagement with an artist who it's an act of caretaking at its core.
So we're passing the mic to me. So as I mentioned, I am the founder of, and I guess, art advisor for PÁIDIA Arts, which is a new company that is going to launch in the next couple of months. For all of you Cape Cod people, you should know I am officially leaving the North Shore and moving to Falmouth. So I will be in the Cape soon and look forward to meeting a lot of you. But I started out my professional career working in fundraising, basic administrative work, paperwork. I had no clue what it really meant to be in the development office. But after being in that kind of a role for a number of years, and eventually I ended up taking the lead role in running the SMFA art sale, which many don't know is actually the largest public art sale in New England. We would sell, anywhere upwards of 4,000 objects in a given year and work with around 700 artists. It was a lot of hustle and bustle. It was the fun, it was the energy. But most importantly for me, it was an entry point for a lot of collectors. Because it was a public art sale and because it was supporting a charity, a lot of people who didn't necessarily fancy themselves as collectors would come in and they would see something and be able to look at a lot of stuff. And maybe they would walk away with something, maybe they wouldn't, but they would take some time to get to know and get to learn. And the longer I was there, the more I saw my role as a fundraiser as really connecting people who could be supportive of the arts directly with the artists. And I think that that's at the core of why I do what I do, and why I would say I'm in that kind of innovative connectors category that Mallory was speaking of. Many people don't realize how hard it really is to kind of make it in the art world, right? Many times artists are working multiple jobs, they're picking up teaching gigs, they're, working design jobs, they're continuing to make the art that they feel passionate about. And it's not always enough to really make a living off of. And so I fancy myself as the person that likes to come in and buy as a point of entry and encouragement for these artists. I think most people don't realize, if you come in and spend a couple of $100s on something with an artist, that may make the difference of whether or not that artist can buy their art supplies, whether or not they can afford a studio space. And there's a trickle down effect. I've seen students who sell well their first year after graduating and don't have to work a third job. They can only work 2 jobs that year and they get a studio space, which means they can be more productive to make more work, bigger work, more ambitious work, which then they can sell for more money. And it starts to get them to a point of sustainability, right? And so when I left the world of fundraising just about a year ago, I started thinking to myself, what is it do I really want to do? Many people say, go open a gallery, because I think that's the narrow field that people understand, right? It's like walk into a shop and buy something off the wall. But I really believe that it's important to connect the individuals more so than just the kind of superficial sale, right? The sale is just one aspect of it. And I think auctions like what's going on at the Cahoon Museum is a great entry point for people where they have the chance to buy something because they know they're being supportive of an organization that they care for. But that's just the beginning. And I kind of urge everyone that's on this Zoom meeting to think about, okay, so now I've bought this work at the end of the auction. Am I going to get even more involved with the Cahoon Museum so I can meet more of the artists like Ethan Moreau, who has work up at the museum right now? Am I going to reach out directly to that artist and introduce myself? For me, when someone comes over to my house and they mention anything about any of the art that's on the walls, and mind you, I've got a lot of blank walls behind me because I'm in the process of moving. Every object on the walls is a personal relationship with that individual, right? And it's so much better when somebody is at a cocktail party at your house or a dinner and they ask a question about something and you say, I was just at their studio, or I just went to Andrew's opening at Child's Gallery and it's amazing, you've got to go, right? And it makes you feel good, but also it helps promote the artist, right? It helps get more people to Andrew's show and hopefully get more people buying his work at that show, which will help him get one step further and one step further within his career. So I'm under this umbrella of collect, connect, and contribute. And many people fancy art collectors as the super elite. I've been an art collector for years and years, and I own a lot of really great work. It's a matter of just being present, being passionate, taking the time to look, taking the time to learn, and taking the time to connect. So.
Thank you, Paul. And I would like to turn the conversation over to Andrew and Azita as the artists in the room, and maybe talk a little bit about what it means to build relationships with the people who have collected your work over the years.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things about getting involved with these kinds of initiatives. You know, there's a couple things that come to mind. One is, you know, I always want to, you know, support the organizations that want to work with me and bring in the work. And so I've worked with the Mass Art Auction to raise money for scholarships, the SMFA art sale, which Paul was mentioning, Montserrat College. There's also some benefits to raise money and awareness for certain things like the AIDS Action Committee, Immigration Justice, and the Coalition for Massachusetts Coalition for the Homeless. So for me as an artist, I always want to be participating in something that has some meaning that I know is making an effect beyond just you know, selling a work of art. But the other thing that I really enjoy about doing these kinds of events is that I'm making the work really accessible to new collectors who are coming there to maybe support the organization and haven't seen my work before, so they can get turned on to the work. They can acquire a piece, and then I build relationships based on that as well. So I might get to know the collectors, and then they might reach out and want to come see work in the studio. And I'm always happy to let people come in and visit the studio. And some collectors invite me to their homes to see the work hanging up, or, you know, just to be social. You know, we might meet up at openings or other events. So that's always really nice when those things happen. So yeah, getting the work out there and meeting people, and also meeting other artists like Azita. I was familiar with Azita's work, but had not met her until this event for tonight. So that's a real bonus. So yeah, I don't know, Azita, if you want to jump in and sit and talk about anything.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Well, I just was thinking about this conversation and discussion. It's really interesting because from a perspective of myself as an artist, I have to be honest, I have not thought about it that much. So I just try to trace the thread from the first time I sold my first piece, and I figure out, okay, so a few things happened. During my second year of MFA degree, I won an award at the museum school, and that award had two outcomes. One of them was that the director of a gallery in Boston, who was one of the juries, saw my work, and later on she showed her interest to represent my work and exhibit it. But also I got into the medal award gala auction at the Museum of Fine Arts, and that night I sold my first piece, my first drawing in the United States, for $3,500, which was an amazing support, huge encouragement for me as an artist that see and have the hope for my future professional career, and knowing that there is interest in my work, what I'm creating in my studio, outside of my studio, in the world. So, and later on through the Gallery Caiaphas in Boston, I sold a few more pieces, and then through my first solo exhibition, it was the first time I met the collectors, and that was the experience I had to meet these people in person, know about them, and build a relationship. And of course, some of them, like Paul Kotakis, I knew him from, when I was a student, and I'm just so honored that he is also one of the collectors of my work now. So these kind of relationship that I built up with the collectors, I just much appreciated compared to the experience that I still have. Like in 2017, I won 2 prizes in London, and through that prize and the gallery, the Cynthia Corbett Gallery, many of my drawings were sold in England, but I've never met these people, and because of visas, difficulties, and considering where I'm coming from and the current political climate, especially when the former president was in power, it just made lots of difficulties to meet and travel. So, and also through all these years, I've gone to more than 10 residencies, and I met many creative, brilliant individual people, and some of them became my collectors later on, and showed their interest in my work and became friends. So long story short, it's just a very different experience for me as an artist to know a person, aside from the financial support that is so crucial for continuing my artistic practice, and I'm sure it's just the same for many other artists in this world, but also creating that connection and knowing the person who has my piece. There are a few drawings and pieces that I have no idea where are they and what people are doing with these pieces. And there have been some experiences, difficulties that the galleries and the directors and dealers didn't necessarily cooperate and showed the interest to connect me as an artist with the collectors. So I've had many experiences, and I can talk about it for a long time, but I just prefer to mention this for now and then see if anyone has any questions.
Well, I would love to actually jump onto something that Mallory had brought up earlier, which Azita just alluded to as well, is this idea of stewardship. And, as an artist, like, my work means more to me probably than it means to anybody else. It's very personal. It's like these objects that I make, and I put myself into them, and then they go out into the world. And there's something about the stewardship that I kind of have this trust. There's sort of like an unspoken agreement that I kind of have with collectors, which is like, I'm giving you something that's very personal to me and is now going to be personal to you. And I hope you have it forever. I hope it becomes an heirloom for your family, and your descendants enjoy it as well as, the time that you get to spend with it. So I think that there is, as an artist, there's something about that relationship that goes even beyond, that initial collection point where it becomes, it becomes they become the steward of the work.
Excellent point, Andrew. So I have some questions here coming in from the chat. First question I have, and we can open this up to everyone, is from Annie Dean, and it asks if it is appropriate to connect with an artist, even if you know they are out of your price range.
I would say certainly. I think artists are normal human beings. I mean, some artists are very strapped for cash, and time is valuable, and it may be hard to schedule a time to sit and have a studio visit with them, but maybe they're working 3 jobs and, burning the midnight oil, and every moment they need to be painting or making money. But most artists, if they have the time, are more than happy to meet you for a studio visit, talk to you about their work. I also think putting yourself where they are, right? Like, go to one of their openings. They're bound to be standing there where you can walk up and shake their hand and say hello and introduce yourself, and start to build a relationship with them. We'll also point out, I've definitely bought works that I quote unquote could not afford, and many artists are happy to put you on a payment plan. If you absolutely fall in love with something that's more than your budget can really handle at the time, see if they'll take a payment plan. Give them a couple $100 a month for the next year if you have to. And most artists, love and appreciate that, because they want the work to go to a good home, and they want it to not just be for the elite who can pay full price.
Thank you very much. The next.
Into that?
Oh,
Sorry.
yes, jump in, Andrew.
I just wanted to say that there's usually always something that's in the studio. If you really like an artist and you really want to acquire work, maybe you start with a drawing or a print, and then later you have this relationship that you build up, and then maybe you can get a painting later, kind of thing. But I think there's always a way to start that engagement if it's about acquiring work.
The next question we have in the chat is from Grace, and Grace asks, as a collector, is it more important to acquire a single artist's work over several years of their career, or buy works of several artists in a particular genre?
I love this question. So part of what I encourage people to do is to, number one, buy what you love. And sometimes that means you might be buying or acquiring things that maybe don't make sense together from an academic standpoint, but at its core, there is a common theme running through seemingly disparate acquisitions. And it's you. It's representing you, what you love. And I think that's really powerful and beautiful as a collecting gesture. And then there, I think, are really wonderful collections that are built around acquiring women artists, for example, or folks of color, or abstract expressionism, for example. And I think that's like a very powerful academic exercise in particular. And I think there's something really beautiful about having artists who are in dialogue with each other in your collection too. But I would encourage anyone here to not be limited to thinking, oh, I only need to acquire paintings of rainbows. If you want to, that's great, but sometimes surprises pop up and you learn things about yourself by being open to feeling whenever you're in front of art.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else have any perspectives on that?
I'll say there's no right or wrong way to do it. I mean, it's your collection, it's your home, it's your passion. You know, if you're passionate about a particular style or theme or individual, run with it. And a lot of times, the more you surround yourself with it, you know, the more pieces I buy from an individual artist, if I have 2 of them or 3 of them, the more it starts to kind of take over my living room, and I love it even more, right? Because I'm living with the 2 or 3 of them, and then I want a 4th one, right? That's not right or wrong, but also as I acquire, I'm deepening my relationship with that individual, and I'm seeing more of them in the work than I did at the first piece that I bought, because now we're closer friends and we become almost family. And looking around my house, it's like it's all relationships.
I have to say, just listening to the way that you've all spoken tonight, one of the really wonderful things that's been coming across from me is so much of what you've all been talking about is, yes, part of art collecting, but so much of it is about developing and building a community. And I think it's always really important to remember that, you know, it may seem like in the art world that it's just artists making art and people buying art, but there is so many different areas of the community that it's what keeps us all in the art community that makes it so rich. And I really love how that's coming across in everything that you are all saying tonight. One thing I'm really interested to know is, as we are talking about like building collections, whether it's personal collections, Mallory, you talked about working with like corporate collections, I think, before, museum collections. You know, can we talk a little bit about the importance of, you know, how do we get more diversity, more women, more people of color into museum collections?
I'm happy to kick off this discussion. I think this is a really important thing to talk about, just because we are living in a moment and have survived hundreds of years where this has really colored, I think, our experiences as people, as humans. And I think one of the things that I really encourage people to do is to be really intentional if that's something they want to accomplish through their collecting practices. So maybe I'm working with a corporate collection and they want to focus on women. So I'm only going to talk to them about women artists because that is their stated preference. I mean, sure, we'll look at lots of things together. But I think just making a really conscious decision, sort of I think leads that gesture. And I think that also has really profound ripple effects, because once more women, once more folks of color become represented in individual collections, maybe those individual collections go to museums one day, and then museum collections, institutional collections also come to represent the diverse world that we live in. So I think actually individual collectors can have really significant, profound impact on museum collections eventually, and how we're thinking about art in a very collective way.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Julie Beck, and this is directly for the artists in the panel. It asks if the artists collect work from other artists and who they personally collect, if so.
Yes, I love collecting artwork from friends of mine, artist friends, and artists that I'm making friends with as I'm collecting their work. A lot of times as an artist, I have the great fortune that I can trade work, especially if there's a common appreciation. But I collect a lot of different friends. Wilhelm Neusser's work is on my wall. I've got a Joel Janowitz hanging up behind me here. I've got a Lucy Kim in the other room. So those are just some of the people. I've got a Sarah Lubin, who I used to share a studio with. Bought a really beautiful piece before her her show at, I'm gonna forget the name of her gallery in New York, but she had this big show that blew up, and I got a piece before the show happened. So.
Azita, how about you?
Oh, it's well, my lifestyle is so different so far, because as an immigrant I had to move a lot, and of course for 3 years I was living as a nomad, so going back to back art residencies. So, and I feel lots of responsibility and of course respect to the artwork. So there are artists that I would like to have their pieces soon in the future, but I first have to find a place that I know I will live for a while, and then I have a safe place to take a good care of them. That's my story.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have a question in the chat that I absolutely love from WN, and it says, what if your living room gets too small? What do you do with the work? Do you give it back to the artist or the gallery?
I'll speak from the perspective of somebody whose living room in his last house had 100 works of art on the walls. It's only too small if you think it's too small, right? I think you can always find space for something that you love if you're willing to live with a kind of an eclectic mix of artwork. But I think it's also okay to rotate out. When I sold my last house and moved to the North Shore, most of my collection's actually in storage right now, which is tough for me, right? But you can't always live with everything. And I'm actually, I'm young and of modest means, and I'm already starting to gift things to institutions, right? Because if I can't enjoy it, I want to make sure it goes to the right home. So if you do have things that are of significance or or have an appropriate connection to an institution, maybe float it by some of those institutions and see whether or not they might want them for their collection.
And Paul, to kind of go just another way to think about if maybe you don't want to keep the work around, a lot of galleries I know are super open to having a conversation if you want to sell work back to a gallery, for example. So there's also that avenue if you don't want to have 100 things in your living room, though that sounds lovely.
I would also, to sort of bounce off from that, say that it's perfectly fine to rotate your collection. Put some things away for a while. Put it, make sure it's wrapped nicely so that it doesn't get damaged. Hang up something new. A year, 2 years later, get out the old piece and hang it back up, and it'll be, there'll be a whole new experience you have with it. It'll be refreshed.
Thank you. So we have a question from Kathleen. And the question is, what are your thoughts on both artists and collectors developing their legacies?
That's a great question. I mean, artists do have to think about their legacy. I recently, well, maybe it was like 2 years ago, I'd moved studios, and in the process of doing that, I had to make a decision about a bunch of old work that I was moving, and I had to sort of cull the old work to get the gems. So I had to basically reduce my past work into my greatest hits. And I think that sort of editing process as an artist was important because I was kind of selecting what I thought was the most important work that I had made, or the most exemplary of the kind of things that I was interested in at the time I was making it. And in terms of collectors, I think that's a pretty, I mean, I'd have to think more about it, but I think it's a really deep question because collectors, you know, I think to what Mallory and Paul was saying that, you know, that work can go to an institution. It might go to an academic museum. It might go to a public museum. And that is part of their legacy. You know, that's part of the collector's legacy to have this body of work. I know some curators that are responsible for acquiring work for museums, and they often look at, you know, they're not able to sort of cherry pick the collection. They get the whole collection, right? So they have to make that decision based on that. And that's part of the legacy of the collector.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any more questions that they would like to ask the panel? All right. Going once, going twice. Okay. And
I have a question I'd like to ask.
yes, Mallory.
Just for my fellow panelists, and this is something I think about a lot, kind of working in spaces where maybe it's not always immediately accessible to everyone. How do we make art collections more accessible in general to the public? Like, what are some strategies that people use or employ to get their work out there in collection forms or otherwise?
I think that's a really, really great question. And I think that's something that all of us who are involved in collections, whether we're artists, collectors, need to think about how we're living with the art. You know, what's the cultural value of the public getting to see what may be some really exceptional pieces that have become lost to public view in private collections.
There's a collector couple in Newton, Jonathan Ostrowski and Kathleen Wright, who host a party every year, and they invite everyone that they've collected, as well as people within the arts community, to come to their house. And it's just an amazing experience because all the work is, you know, floor to ceiling, hanging everywhere, and it's just a wonderful, good vibe gathering of everybody looking at the work and talking about the work. And I think, you know, the fact that they open their home to people like that annually, you know, is a really wonderful experience.
I also, as an artist, had the experience of seeing the exposure more and more to many people and individuals through the residencies that I had and the studio visits that I had in each and every place I've been. So I think it's just so important to use the studio space, if the artist, of course, has the ability to open the doors to the public and participate in different art institutions, and the independent curators and other programs can be a help on this path. But also, as an artist whose work has been mainly at the galleries and museums, I had these thoughts over the last year of pandemic that I want to be connected and see my work more exposed and even practically used by people, and how I can make that happen. And that's when I started to think about, you know, my pieces, my drawings to become a mural. I'm applying for different grants and projects to make one of the pieces as a mural, and also think about like the fashion design, how I can participate and have the experience of becoming a fashion designer and having something that can be both exhibited at the galleries and museums, but also practically used and wear by performance artists or even people. So I think that's what I might add to it.
Thank you so much. In the chat, we have Loretta Park, who just wanted to say that she absolutely loved Mallory's question from earlier. So thank you very much, Loretta. Next up, we have a question from Julie Beck. And the question is, does the average person still think buying original art is valuable in general, or is it restricted to a certain groups of people?
I'll say my goal with everything that I do is to try to lower that barrier of entry. I think I know some very fabulously wealthy people through my years of fundraising, and I'm shocked at how many of them own a lot of, excuse me, own a lot of really fabulous work, but would never consider themselves collectors because there is a little bit of a stigma of the elitism of the collectors. But some of my favorite pieces that I bought for $40 out of some sidewalk sale from an artist that I absolutely loved. And I loved it at $40. And over the years, I've stayed in touch with him. And sometimes the price points go up and sometimes they don't. But it has value to me. And I think everyone has an entry point. And I think we need to make it more accessible for your average person.
And to bounce off of that, that's why something like this art auction is so great, because there are things at every single price point. There is that accessible entry point, and it is emerging artists. And you know, art. I think the art market and how things increase or decrease in value, it can feel very opaque, but it is really exciting, I think, at its core, to discover a new artist who is accessible, price point wise, in a venue like this auction.
I'll say you often regret what you don't buy more so than what you buy. And so when you see that thing, and sometimes it's, you know, a little bit more than you thought you could afford, and sometimes it skyrockets in value, and you think to yourself, should have bought that when it was 1,000 because now it's 20,000. Not everything's going to do that, but you more often regret what you don't buy.
Thank you so much. If nobody has any more questions from the audience, I will begin to lead us out. Let me see, that someone, oh, there are some things coming in on the chat, lots of thank yous. Thank you very much. So next thing I wanted to do is just upload some information about our panelists into the chat in case anybody would like to reach out to any of them. So all of their information is now in the chat. We've also got Andrew and Azita's websites on there, along with Mallory and Paul's email addresses. And first and foremost, I would just like to thank our panelists and everyone who attended tonight. We really appreciate your support. And I really appreciate the support of our panelists tonight in giving us a really, really interesting panel discussion. The Cahoon Museum Art Auction is ongoing until July 10th, so don't forget to get your bids in. If you enjoyed this panel and are interested in checking out some of the other things that we have produced here at the Cahoon, please check out our YouTube channel. The link is in the chat. And what will be really helpful to us is if you are in there, it doesn't cost you anything, hit the subscribe button, and that just notifies you when we release new panels and programs like this on our YouTube channel. This will help us continue to bring you more exciting virtual programming to enjoy. You can also stay connected with what we are doing at the Cahoon Museum by signing up on our website to receive emails that will let you know of future events. If you would like to support our work here at the museum, please consider making a donation or joining us as a member as we continue to bring you new exhibitions and programming. And don't forget, connect us on social media to stay up to date with the day-to-day activities here at the Cahoon. And thank you to our sponsors, William H. and Mary H. Woods Fund for Arts and Literacy, the Horton family, and a special thank you to Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Robert Paul Properties, with additional support from Stand Up Paddle, Cape Cod, and Sunderland Printing. Thank you so much for everyone who came to see us tonight, and thank you to our panelists. And if you could say thank you in the chat on your way out, I know that they would all appreciate it very much. Thank you all, and good night. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful night.